like, thank God that it was spring break. But I'm already grading, and I think I have like 12 or 13 exams to go. So I'm planning after this class is to sit on my over here in the dining room and finish grading, so you can have your exams graded over there. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about evolution. If you have any questions or anything, just don't hesitate and stop me whenever you want. So I'm gonna just stop the subtitles for now. So if anyone wants subtitles or something, just let me know. Either way, I'm trying to retrieve and put all the YouTube videos later with subtitles and on in each module. I think I just missed one, but the other ones they have, I think they have been uploaded already on each module over here. So evolution. So anyone has any idea what is evolution or what we talk or what's the, like you have any idea of what evolution is or how it is related to us, something like that? Any insights about evolution?
Evolution is what Darwin thought is that man came from a species, a certain species. A lot of people say apes, but it's the evolution of a species, whether it be um, a caveman or whatever you want to say, to the present day, what we are today, the evolution of where we have taken our DNAs have changed over time and have adapted to the nature and I would say the environment which we are in right now.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you so much for the insight. So as David was saying, remember, like evolution is related to adaptation and changes on the DNA over the time, right? So in order to create new species. So technically that will be a little bit of the definition of evolution. As Darwin was saying, there was a second book, like the first one that he published was The Origin of Species by Means of the Natural Selection, and the other one was about the human evolution and sexual selection. That's something that he calls sexual selection that we'll see on one of these slides. And people was making fun of him because he was saying like, yeah, humans are animals. And everyone was like, what? We're not animals. We are like something different. We don't belong to the kingdom Animalia. We belong to something else. And he was saying, well, yeah, we belong to that, and we are related to other organisms like apes and gorillas, etc. And we are coming from ancestors from the same of that lineage. And everyone was making fun of him, but as David was saying, that we're coming from an ape-like ancestor that gave origin to different like other species of Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalis, and even we as humans coexisted with them, like Homo sapiens, which is a species of modern humans. We actually coexisted with Homo neanderthalensis in parts of Europe. So proof of that is like we have many of the genes that they belong to those species. We have those genes in our genome now. So say diseases like diabetes is one of the diseases that Neanderthals used to have. Humans as pure breeds, we didn't have diabetes. But then this genetic diabetes, which is like type 1 diabetes, is something that was coming from the Neanderthals. So imagine like we are not like pure human breeds. So we, all of us contain some sections of Neanderthals. So that's a really interesting fact. Like 60,000 years, 100,000 years ago, we used to be mating with other species. It's like if you hear about the mixes of the tiger and the lion, I think how I don't know how they call it, the liger, something like that. But if you see it, actually those two species they can mate with each other, and they leave an offspring. And that offspring, if you see, is just like a huge cat. It's like bigger than a lion or something like that, and they have some stripes. It's like technically like a hybrid between a tiger and a lion. So we're gonna see all these information over here in these following slides. So let me move to the next one. So also we're gonna see today, if you watch this when you were a child, at least I enjoy watching this X-Men version of 1992. You have Wolverine, you have Rogue and Apocalypse, and all of these guys with superpowers. And I remember when I was watching the first X-Men, yeah, the first X-Men movie, and then Charles Xavier was saying like mutation is the key of evolution, and then blah blah blah. He was talking more. So after this class, like, or I can even ask you before, like, do you think that might be possible through evolution to reach this type of superpower characteristics in humans? What do you think? Do you think we could be like Cyclops, like shooting beams, like laser beams, or like controlling weather, like storm, or like Jubilee with shooting stuff or something like that?
Do I think we could be like Cyclops? No, but I think we can over time with genetics and DNA things. You'll see you an example of what you'll see stronger and faster human beings, and you see that with I guess new drugs that are coming out that you know people take to become stronger, to become faster, to become uh, quicker at stuff. There may be something there where they could get smarter, but do I think there's something that where we can control a laser beam or become like Wolverine and have uh, sharp blades coming out of our wrist or whatever? No.
What? Yeah, that's a good thought. Anyone else wants to um, add something besides David over here? Somebody that likes to watch X-Men and likes sci-fi and everything. Do you think we could reach something like this? In my position, I would say that, yeah, David is right. Like probably a laser beam or something that would be too intense, but say super healing or healing process faster than usual could be probably achieved with CRISPR technologies, and we are genome editing. And then instead of like having my finger here for like a whole 2 weeks or something, I could probably heal in 3, 4 days or something like that. So make it faster or something. So yeah, there are some things that we can improve as humans, but it's not going to be through natural selection. We'll see like natural selection always is going to be working on phenotypes that are really exist. So say if you want to have wings, like there is a mutant over here, like Archangel or something like that is the name. Like we are not going to grow like wings in our backs, but actually if you see all the wings for every single organism, like a bat, or like a bird, like they're going to be always be modifying their four limbs, like or arms. They're going to modify it for flying. So we are not going to create anything out of nothing. So always evolution is going to be working on characteristics that we already have, right? So that's something that we will see in a little bit that I'm just letting you in advance. Okay, next slide over here. So same with Evolution. If you haven't watched this movie, Evolution is a really funny one. So I recommend you any weekend that you have free time, you can watch it. It's just like a spaceship like hits Earth, and then there is like aliens or something, but they start evolving from the very like forms of life all the way to dinosaurs and everything. And yeah, it's pretty fun. So you can just watch it whenever you have a time. So if you see over here, like this is a chart that I'm comparing how many genes we share with other organisms. So we share about like or 98% of genetic material with chimpanzee, 92 with a mouse, 76 with the zebrafish. Even if you see with the fruit fly, a fly that is just right over there, when you leave a banana just over there and you start seeing fruit flies all over the place, they share 51% of the genetic material same with you. So that is like if you run your whole genetic material, all your DNA, and then you run theirs, 50% is going to be the same. So you wonder why do we share 50% with them? Do you have any idea why we could be sharing that large amount of genetic material with fruit fly? Like really, we don't look alike at all, right? So it might be probably because we are using the same enzymes, we're having the same different type of cells, we're producing the same type of, like, say, organelles, etc., etc. So that's why we have to share the same genetic material at some point, because also that material is going to be universal. Even with the simplest bacteria like E. coli, which is a microorganism that you need 1,000 times a length augmentation in the microscope in order to see it, we even share almost like a fifth of our DNA with them. And it is the same because we are using similar enzymes, similar structures in a microscopic level, and then we all are sharing one thing, which is genetic material. So what does this mean? So what I'm trying to say with this one, say, like, if you are here, for example, in this point over here, and then a bacteria is going to be over here, actually, if you notice, we are very far away from each other, but we are actually coming from one single tree, from one single common ancestor. So that's why we are sharing this amount of DNA, because this is one of the proof that we are actually coming from one common ancestor. So if you follow the branch over here, it connected to a bigger one, which connects to a bigger one, all the way that you find the root of something over here. The same with this one, if you follow the trail to the main trunk and then you go to the bottom, you're going to realize that all organisms on Earth are coming from the same origin. So that's why they call it like the single common ancestor, because the DNA is one of the proofs. I mean, the shared DNA is one of the proof that we are coming from one common ancestor. So at some point, everyone is going to be related since about like 3.4 billion years ago. So we're gonna discuss later some of the things about like creationism. We can be talking about the evolution and everything, so we can discuss about like your thoughts about, like, do you think God created us? Do you think evolution is just like a principle, just like a random event that happened in the universe of like what's happening over here? So that's something that we can discuss in a little bit, okay? So as you can see over here, and I'm showing you the tree of life over here. So this is just to depict quickly the big groups of organisms that we have, with bacteria grouped over here, and then we have eukaryotic cells over here. We have plants and animals and fungi, flagellates, and we're going to talk about all these diversity later on the following classes. And we have other organisms over here. So if you see, like, all these tree of life is always coming to the one single point over here. So all living things, they share the same common ancestors. And then if we draw the tree of life to show how every species is related, we're going to get to this point over here. So how we have all these organisms all over the place. So these organisms were created through a process called evolution. So evolution, as we were discussing later, is just a process in which one species give rise to another species by changes on their genetic material. That's something that I didn't put over here, but you can put like by changes of the genetic material. So even also, if you go, I'm going to stop sharing because I want to share something on the website over here. So let me see. So if you go to a website called the Tree of Life Web Project, let me share back my internet over here. So if you go to the Tree of Life Web Project, or the tollweb.org, and you click over here, at the beginning, you're going to notice that there is a tree over here showing the like different groups of organisms. So say if you can click in vertebrates, you can click on fungi, you can click on other animals, insects and plants and microorganisms. And every single time that you click on one of them, it's going to show you another tree, which is showing the evolutionary relationships between organisms. So say Amniora, which is the group in which we belong, is related to Diatectomorpha, which is extinct. This cross means like it's gone already, doesn't exist anymore. So as you can see, like before there were other groups that existed once in time. Like remember, life arose about like 3.4 billion years ago. So the only group that is alive of all of these ones is going to be this one called the Amniora. If you click inside of Amniora over here, then it's going to show you another tree over here, which is going to show you the other organisms that are alive and are extinct too. So we have Diapsida, which is organisms, and in their schools, they have like two openings beside the eyes. They have like two openings on the sides. So in these ones, we can include lizards, crocodiles, etc., etc. And then we have Testudines, which they're also called Anapsida. And then dead, everyone is dead. And then we have Synapsida, which is the ones with one opening. You click over there, it's going to show you another group, like another grouping. And then when you go to Therapsida, it's going to show you another kind of grouping in which all of them are extinct except Mammalia, which are mammals like us, elephants, and everything. And then it's going to show you another one with another groups. And we have three groups alive. You go to Eutheria, and then later you can even click on all of them like this one. And then you can check, say, for example, primates, which is our group over here. And then you can see that we have several groups over here. We can go to Catarrhini, which is a subgroup, and then Hominidae. And then we have different species like Pongo, Pan, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and Homo and Gorilla. You click on Homo, and you see we have like different organisms that were once and once existed, but now they're gone. And the only one remaining of this group is going to be the modern humans, which is the Homo sapiens. So if you want to visit like this website later, it's pretty cool because it is going to show you all the relationships between organisms. So if you start going back and going back and going back, so that's the whole point that I want to reach over here with you. And going back and going back and more back and back and back and back. So you're going to notice that we are coming from the same evolutionary tree. So that's something very important to mention, that we are all coming from a common ancestor. So at the end, in the long term with Earth, with all organisms, we could be like brothers and sisters, or like far away related, since like 3 billion years ago, 2 billion years ago, 100 million years ago, but we all somehow related in this Earth, okay? So going back to share my other screen over here. Okay, so let's continue with the slides over here. So evolution, let's keep talking about evolution. Evolution, remember, as I was mentioning before, let me move, okay. So there is a lot of confusion between if evolution exists or evolution doesn't exist. But actually, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the class, evolution is going to be both a theory and a fact. So we're gonna discuss later how it is a fact and how it is a theory. But the theory of evolution is going to deal with how evolution happens, with the processes of evolution and evidence of evolution. And evolution is going to be a fact because there is a huge amount of evidence that is showing that evolution exists. So this is not related to evolution. This is just related in general, what is a theory. So theory, and I think we discussed that during the first class in the scientific method. The theory might be formed after many related hypotheses have been tested and supported with evidence. And it's going to be a broad and comprehensive statement of what is thought to be true, based on all these hypotheses that they have been tested over and over and over again. And there is a large evidence supporting these hypotheses over here. So when you tie together all related hypotheses and they are pointing to the same, you're going to have a theory. Also, for Allah, is a statement of a fact. As I was mentioning, evolution is going to be a fact, and is going to be accepted to be true within the experts or the scientific community. There is no doubt that evolution exists, so it's going to be a fact because it's going to be accepted to be true. The same as the gravitational forces exist not only on Earth but all over the universe, from dark with from black holes to big stars to small planets and moon and everything has gravitational forces, and many of them actually can be even expressed in mathematical equations. You're gonna see later that there is even one mathematical equation that explains the absence of evolution, and we'll see it later over here. So a little bit of what we'll be talking today in more detail. We're gonna be talking about how evolution was discovered, a little bit of the history of what happened. We're gonna see Darwin, Lamarck, and other people that were participating actively into discovering evolution. We're gonna have a section of how evolution works. We're gonna study the mechanisms of evolution, and then we're gonna check later the evidence for evolution. So don't forget, as I was mentioning before, the evidence of evolution can be done in a laboratory in a week, but also say when I'm asking you, show me the how can I believe that you were a kid once? So you probably are not going to have like, I cannot have you in a lab growing since you were a baby, and then I'm gonna be seeing you like growing all the way, reaching 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, 7, 8, 9, and growing to be an adult. So actually many of these evidence of evolution is going to be fractions, because the same as when you're trying to prove that you were a kid, you're gonna show that you had your toys kept in the closet because you kept some of your toys. You're gonna show pictures when you were a kid, and based on all this evidence that is fraction over here, here, and there, then you're going to conclude that then indeed you were once a child. So the evidence evolution in a big scope, when you're talking about millions of years, is something like that. So you're gonna be working with the fractions or the pictures of that specific moment, and then you're going to deduce after this what happened. So a little bit of the historical events for the discovery of evolution. So like right before um, science was more established and more technology came up to date, people believe that actually the species were fixed. Even scientists, they always thought that species always existed, fixed, and they didn't move, and they were created by a supreme creator called God or gods, and depending on their religious beliefs and everything. So it was even scientists. There is a guy that we're gonna study in next class. His name is Carl Linnaeus, and he was actually the guy who invented a system of classification of organisms and how to name them. So he was saying like he just wanted to make sense of what God created. So he was just trying to organize organisms like in similar groups and name them in a specific way just to show the existence of God. So before like the times of evolution, people was saying like, yeah, like everything is fixed. The Bible or other holy books, they are mentioning that they were created this way and they are not moving. So a cow was always a cow, a dog was always a cow, and a rabbit was always a rabbit, and that's it. So there was no discussion about it. So there was about, as I was mentioning over here, classical times during long after Renaissance, species were considered to be special creations fixed for all time. But then later, around the 1800s, like scientists started like seeing other things in nature. They started seeing that there were other things like fossil records, and then they were seeing like, why are these like skeletons of organisms that we never seen alive buried over there? There was a guy also in the 1800s. His name was Lamarck, like Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So what he was trying to explain, it was something called the transmutation hypothesis. So it's not even a theory because it wasn't proved. It was a hypothesis that he had that a species could change or transmute. So that's why he was mentioning it was a transmutation. So what he was thinking, it was like the example of the giraffe over here that we have in this picture, that through the lifespan of an organism, this individual was able to acquire special characteristics during its lifetime, and then he could pass these characteristics to the next generation. So say I'm gonna start working out a lot and then like really get like big muscles and everything, and then what I'm going to expect is like my children, when they're born, they're going to also, when they are adults, they also are going to be really big and muscle and everything. Or I'm going to start like stretching my neck more and more. I'm going to start practicing stretching my neck throughout my life. So at some point, I'm going to stretch my neck long enough that when I'm going to have children, these children are going to born with these long necks. So that was the idea of Lamarck of transmutation, that actually an individual was capable of making these changes, and then they were transferring these to the next generation. So he was somehow right in the way that we actually pass the information to the next generation or to the offspring, but the mistake that he was having, it was that actually individuals, we cannot actually acquire these characteristics during the lifetime. So these adaptations that we have are not going to be just passed around in only one single generation. What actually is going to happen is that we are going to transfer these characteristics in several hundreds or probably thousands of generations down. So say you can tell me like, like in Africa, there are like some people that actually they stretch their necks. Like you've seen like the women in some tribes and everything, they have like a lot of like rings over here so they can stretch their necks. But actually, if you notice, when they have children, the children are born with a normal sized neck. So the length is going to be normal as a human. So actually, they are not transferring that characteristic, but instead of that, we as organisms, we have some certain plasticity to adapt to specific environments. But this plasticity doesn't mean that I'm going to be transferring this information to the next generation. So the idea of transmutation never grew too much because there wasn't like that many examples. It was just like a simple hypothesis that Lamarck was trying to give, but we don't have to take the credit of Lamarck trying to explain how these processes were working. So this is the example again of Lamarck. So you have a tiny giraffe looking like a horse, and then it was growing and growing, and the trees was also, they were growing more. So that's why the need of stretching the neck and stretching the neck more and more and more and more. So actually like they could reach the food, which was all the way in the canopy. So he was thinking that actually these giraffe all the way to the last one actually were the same one. So that was a brilliant idea that Lamarck had back in time. Also, Will Smith, but not the actor, not the guy who went with his uncle to Bel Air to live because he had issues in Philadelphia. So there was another guy many, many years ago. Actually, he was discovering many things on soil. So he was like a geologist, and then he was like working with types of rocks and everything. So he was actually like discovering like there were some fossils of like shells and sea animals, even in the high mountains of England. So he was saying like how these animals, how these organisms, they reach places that are really far away from the ocean. So he was saying like maybe something happened over here that probably England was submerged like in the ocean before, and then it like arose from the ocean, and then all these animals got trapped over there, and they got fossilized over here. So he was saying like also like these species of animals that I'm discovering, I haven't seen them at all alive. So always, all of them, they repeat over and over again as fossils, but I haven't seen them all like alive ever. So he was saying like, well, there might be a chance that these animals or these organisms existed once, and they are not even mentioned in the Bible or any other like holy book or anything like that. So he was like, this is something going on over here that we need to figure it out. But then it was until a couple years later, couple decades later, in which this guy called Charles Darwin, he was like a recent graduate from, I think, Cambridge University. So he finished his studies. I think he tried to study medicine. He was unsuccessful. So then his dad was telling him, well, you know, you have two chances. Either you become a priest or then you become a biologist or a naturalist. That was how they called biologists before. And then you have to live like that. So he was like, you know, actually I'm going to be a biologist, so I don't want to be a priest, or I want to enjoy life traveling, etc., etc. So what happened, it was like there was a funding by the government, by the crown of England, and then they needed a biologist or a naturalist to go with them. And then Darwin was like, you know, actually, I'm going to go because I'm a recent graduate and I want to do something else. And then my mind is wandering too much about everything. So I need to take a long break from this one, from everything. And then let's see what's going on around Earth. So, and from 1831 to 1836, he traveled in a ship called the HMS Beagle. He traveled worldwide. I'm going to show you the map in the next slide, but he was dazzled by the amazing diversity all over the place. So he saw like in the different countries and different continents, he was seeing different types of diversity. But then he was starting to think like how this diversity arose in every single place. Okay, birds are like the same, you know, they have feathers, they fly, but the birds over here and the birds on the other place are different. So the diversity is going to be different. Like they have the same function, they have the same thing, but like how were they created, how they come to exist. So that was his main idea. So this is a picture of Charles Darwin in the 1870s or something like that. He was already tired of fighting people about evolution and everything, etc. And anyways, in the voyage of the Beagle, so there was this ship over here. So he was, as I was mentioned before, he had a 5-year trip, and then he was stopping in all places around the world. But the most important stop that he had, it was in one place called the Galapagos Islands, which is now part of the country Ecuador. Ecuador, so they belong to that country, but he stopped over there, and then he was noticing that there were like unique creatures that were similar from island to island, but they actually had like minimal characteristics that were different from one species to another one. And when he realized actually these adaptations of these shapes or these phenotypes that they had were adapted to the specific environment in which they used to live. So he started wondering why they had these adaptations and how they came to exist. And then he was like, what if they come from the same lineage of birds, but actually they adapted to the specific environments in which they needed to live. So then he started like thinking harder about this, and this is the map in which he was traveling all over the place for 5 years. So he started in Plymouth over here, and then he went all the way to Cape Verde, the islands of Tenerife, and he stopped in Bahia, Rio de Janeiro, all Brazil, like Falkland Islands, that they belong to Argentina slash England. And then he stopped in the Galapagos Islands, which he made his major like data collection. He can travel to Australia, all the Malaysia island around it. You see, like he just went all over the place for 5 years. So he literally went around the world in 5 years. So then he collected a lot of information from everywhere that he could go. But mainly it was the main example that he was using, it was from the Galapagos Islands over here. So what he was noticing with this is that actually there were some finches that actually they have different beaks, as you can see the beaks over here. So anatomically, like say if you ignore the beaks over here, they were going to be, they look very, very, very similar, 99%, but then he noticed that the beaks were different for each different species in one of each different islands. So when he started noticing actually these beaks were an adaptation to a specific type of food that they were eating. For example, like the ones with a large round, with a large eating seeds, they have a beak that was going to be large and round. And say, for example, for the ones eating cactuses and flowers, they have this a little bit more elongated beak. The ones that were like vegetarian, they have a different shape, and the ones that were like the woodpecker finch in this case, and they were eating insects, were a little bit more like a needle-like, more elongated, but actually they were even capable of using tools like this one over here. So he was saying like, yeah, there has to be an adaptation for every single environment in which they are living, and most likely they are coming from a common ancestor right over here. So he was saying like maybe this common ancestor was living in multiple islands over here. So these common ancestors, so say, think these ones are islands, and then the common ancestor arrived to each one of these ones over here. But then in this island, they had the necessity of eating this type of fruits because these fruits were more abundant over here. So then this group of organisms specialized into eating this type of seeds, and then specialized into having this type of beak. And probably these ones over here were like eating more insects in this island because the insects probably were more abundant over here. So then they developed the adaptation of having this beak like this shape over here. So for thousands of years, each one of them, they became isolated from each other. And then in one of each different single island, then you had birds with different types of beaks for different types of adaptation for eating. So that's something that actually Charles Darwin was noticing back in those years. You see the real pictures of the birds over here. They are all the same genera, which are, I think, the Geospiza. Yeah, so they're different species over here. As you can see, the beaks are different shapes in each one of them. So from very big ones and robust ones to really tiny and delicate ones. So they belong to the same ancestor, but each one of them now is a different species. So Darwin was like, okay, so how can I make this happen? How can I conciliate all my information, and how can I explain my ideas over here? So just let me drink a little bit of coffee so I keep talking over here. So what happened later is like he didn't take like a couple years to write his book. He, as it says over here, he spent 20 years of his life trying to write down a book which is called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. So this long name that he put on this book, actually, we call it now The Origin of Species. So when you hear next time the book of the origin of species, you can actually, this is the whole name, the one that I show you, the origin species, blah, 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 all these names. So we call it the origin species. Actually, I have it in my bookshelf over there. I read it for fun. And actually, when I'm reading, I was like, yeah, this is obvious. Yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, this is obvious. Yeah, I know it. It's just because he was the one who actually 150, 160 years ago, he came up with this idea. So this idea of the origin of species by the means of natural selection was just a whole revolution in how we understand science, and how species arise from another species now. So the origin of species was published in November 24th, 1859. So he introduced the scientific theory that populations, not individuals, remember populations, evolve over the course of generations through a process called natural selection. So if everyone heard about natural selection and you think, oh, the survival of the fittest, so you are like 95% accurate of what is natural selection. And then he introduced the idea that diversity of life arose by common descendant through a branching pattern of evolution. What I mean with the branching pattern of evolution is like I have this common ancestor over here that is later going to divide into species A, species B, and species C. But then later, this one with time, these ones over here are going to branch even more into more species. So this one is going to be species B1, species B2, and species B3. And this one is going to also like create a branching system. So at the end, you're gonna have like a genealogy, like a tree of evolution showing the evolutionary relationships of this. Of course, some of them are going to go extinct as the website that I showed you before, so they are no longer going to exist. But some of them, like the ones in which we are right now, we still exist as after 3.4 billion years of life on Earth. So we are lucky that our group of organisms still exist and they were successful in order to survive and adapt and evolve. So Origin of Species, this book introduced the idea of natural selection and how we create new species by common ancestors, right? So there was a lot of controversy of the book. So many people were saying like this is evidence of for creation. So they're saying like, okay, Darwin, you right hit the point in trying to explain the mechanism in how God created everything. And scientists, the other group were saying like, wait, no, like this is actually just a mechanism to explain how organisms arose from one another, but actually we have nothing to do with religion. So actually, it is up to now, up to date, that actually scientists are trying to separate this part from here and from here. They are trying to say like like we are just trying to provide information of the proof of something, but we don't want to deal with creationism or anything like that. So they're just like, we just want to show that this is the evidence for evolution, and we leave these like theological parts to different types of conversation. So um, there is a discussion I want to explain later in what is going to consist, but it's something related to these sections over here. So evolution at this point is, and it is accepted in the scientific community, that actually like the book of Darwin is just like evidence for evolution. So he didn't want to explain why God created everything. There are other guys before, like a century before him, that they tried, and explicitly they said like, we wanted to show how God works. But in his book, he was just trying to explain how animals, how organisms um, they they are created. Okay. So a little bit of natural selection, which is the important part of what Darwin was trying to explain. So he was trying to explain what was natural selection in his book, and he was like explaining, for example, like in where food is limited, there is going to be certain competitions between the same organisms. Say, if we are humans, we're going to compete for the same resources, but also we're going to compete against another organisms of different species, and only the fittest ones are going to survive. Say, if we have food that is actually 8 feet high, so somebody that is going to be 4.5 feet or 5 feet is going to find a hard way in order to reach food, and then it is incapable of jumping too high, is not going to get enough food. But if somebody that is 6 feet to 6.5 feet is going to jump and easily get the food, so that person is going to obviously have an advantage because he's going to have more available food as the other one. Or you think as a cheetah trying to run against a zebra, But then there are two cheetahs. One is going to be faster than the other one. Then the one that is faster is going to outcompete the slower cheetah, and then the slower cheetah will have higher chances of dying of hunger, while the other cheetah that is faster is going to actually survive, is going to eat the zebra, and then is going to then mate and reproduce, and the chances of leaving those genes into the pool of alleles of the whole population is going to be higher than the one that is going to probably die. So this is basically the idea of natural selection. The idea of natural selection, and natural selection can be defined as I have it over here, is going to be the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in phenotype. So in other words, when you say the survival of the fittest, right? So the fittest are going to be the ones that they have the best phenotype for that specific environment, right? So these organisms are going to be the fittest for that specific environment, are going to have the best phenotype. So then they are going to live more children, and then they're going to, first of all, they're going to survive more, and then they're going to leave more offspring than the ones that are not like the fittest for that specific environment. Of course, the ones that are not completely, are not the fittest, they have chances to reproduce and survive, but it's not as high as the ones that are the fittest for that specific environment. So next time, and I'm pretty sure for the exam, we're going to ask you explain or define natural selection. So if you tell me it's the survival of the fittest, I'll be like, okay, I'll give you half of the question. But what I want you to understand that there is something else behind it, which is adding the words phenotype and adding this very, very, very important section over here, which is going to be the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in phenotype. So the differential survival, that means like, again, organisms with the fittest adaptations for the specific environment are going to survive more. And then since they're going to survive more, then they're going to have more likely, like higher chances of reproduction and leaving their genotypes to the next generation. And that's why I asked this question. How does this relate to genotype? Because you know, phenotype is just an expression of the genotype. So if the fittest phenotype, that means that the fittest is going, you're gonna leave the fittest genotype on the genetic pool of the whole population that you have over there. That makes sense to you? Yes, not? Yeah. So again, the idea with the cheetah and the zebras and everything. So you have a slow cheetah, a fast cheetah, and slow zebra and a fast zebra. So say then both cheetahs are running behind the slow zebra. So then the fast one is going to eat it. He's going to capture it and is going to eat it over there. So then it's going to survive because then the other cheetah is not going to eat anything. So there's going to be a difference between survivorship over there. And then the cheetah that actually survive will be capable of having offspring that will have the chances of running really fast because that might be part of the genotype that is going to be expressed on the phenotype. And the zebra also, like if the zebra was fast enough, is going to run away from the fast cheetah, but the slow zebra is going to stay behind and is going to get eaten by the cheetah. So then that specific genotype of the zebra is not going to pass anymore to the next generation because it got eaten. But the fast zebra actually is going to survive. So again, there's a difference between survivorship, and then it's going to have chances to reproduce with another zebra and then have offspring. So that's all what natural selection is. And then Darwin was trying to explain this in hundreds of pages and trying to give examples of what was going on and how the adaptations and everything used to work in natural selection. So is that clear to everyone? I see many of the computer or your cameras are off, so I don't know if you can tell me yes, not, or this, yes. James is saying yes. Thank you. Yeah, Andrew is saying yes. All right, perfect. Thank you. So let's continue. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you. All right, so let's continue over here. Thank you, Lizette. Um, so how natural selection works. So, you know, variations are going to exist in all populations of organisms due to genetic variability. If you see right now, all of us, we are not the same. Like we have variation in eye color, type of hair, skin color, but also we can go inside of us, like to a microscopic level, and then there's going to be variations on some of the blood type, but also on the resistance that we have for some diseases or not, etc., etc. So we're gonna have a lot of variations within the same population of organisms because we're gonna have all this genetic variability. And some of the individuals with the specific traits are going to survive and reproduce more, so the best adapted to that specific environment. And other individuals, they're going to reproduce more than individuals with other traits. So you just think, an example, we have a brown rabbit and a white rabbit. I think I explained that before, I'm not sure. That's my dog barking over here. USPS coming over here. It's like he's really upset. Okay, can you see? Okay, so then we have a brown rabbit and a white rabbit, and then you are in an environment that is all snow. So you are an eagle trying to hunt. So which rabbit do you think you're gonna see faster? The white or the brown one?
The brown.
The brown, right? Of course, thank you, James, because you know, like the white ones is going to camouflage on the white snow. So if you're an eagle trying to find anything, you'll see the brown first. You're gonna spot the brown first, and then you're gonna go down and you're gonna capture the rabbit, and then you're going to remove part of these brown alleles from the population. So over time, these frequencies of these percentages of brown alleles are going to diminish, are going to keep going down and going down all the way that if you continue that way, you can reach zero. So then you won't have any brown rabbit because you ate them all. But what if, like, say, right in the middle of the season, then you change from winter to spring, and actually everything becomes brown? So which one you're gonna spot first? You're gonna spot um, the the brown rabbit or the white rabbit on a brown background? Which one do you think you're gonna say?
White.
I'm sorry, say again?
White. White.
The white rabbit? Yeah, because you see, you're gonna be a big, thank you, a big contrast between the brown and the whites. And then you're gonna see the white ones. And then if you notice, actually these flip around. So now the one that was fittest at the beginning and the best adapted to snow now is the less adapted. And now the brown rabbit is going to be the best adapted to that specific environment. And that's what I keep telling, like, to that specific environment, because everything is going to be subjective to that, to the specific environment that you have at that time. And those fluctuations that happens from like snow, no snow, brown, white, and everything are happening in a really like kind of like almost an equilibrium, because you know we have seasons throughout the year, for example. So then these changes in the alleles, these changes in percentages of the brown and the white alleles are going to be changing very slow, generation through generation. So that's why evolution takes a long time. In big animals like us, say human beings, we are supposed as species, we are supposed to exist for 1 million years. So imagine how many generations of us will have to happen or will have to exist after, if we follow the normal rules of evolution, like how in how many generations. See, if it is thought that the very first Homo sapiens existed about like between 200 to 300,000 years ago. So we are about like 300,000 years out of a million years. So we will have as Homo sapiens, we have 700,000 years to go as Homo sapiens. Like if we are not like giving a lot of pressure to change our anatomy and everything, probably we're going to exist as humans for another 700,000 years or something, unless we go to different planets, we start doing crazy CRISPR genome editing stuff. Then what I'm trying to say is like evolution happens in a very, very slow way in big organisms like us. So then, as I was mentioning, how natural selection works, going back into the topic over here, the population gradually is going to evolve because the best adapted ones are going to survive. They're going to reproduce more. These individuals with different traits are not going to reproduce as much. So then the alleles, the frequencies, the percentages are going to change. And then the population slowly, generation by generation, is going to change. Like the same example of the white rabbits. If we always have snow, and then all the brown rabbits are going to disappear at some point. So the frequencies or the percentages of the alleles are going to change. Instead of being 25, 75%, it's going to reduce, it's going to change. Something else like that I was mentioning before, what if the environment changes? So then these best adapted ones probably are not going to be the best ones, and then the coin is going to flip, and then again the frequencies are going to change different and against the best adapted to the previous environment. All right, so that's how natural selection is going to work. And how natural selection is going to work. So natural selection is going to work and is going to apply its rules in something called adaptations. So, you know, adaptations, when you are saying like, yeah, I got adapted to the cold environment, I got adapted to this, and I got adapted to pain or something. Actually, it's just like when you're talking about adaptations are just inherited characteristics that increases an organism change of survival. So adaptations have to do a lot with a genotype, because you're transferring your genotype from you to your children to your grandchildren, etc., etc. So these adaptations are going to be transferred from one generation to the next one. And it is very important to note that individuals are not the ones that are going to develop genetic adaptations. So say right now, I want to adapt myself to become immune to, say, HIV, and I'm forcing myself somehow to adapt to be immune to HIV or immune to Ebola. So I want to go to those places in Africa in which they still have Ebola, and this virus, actually, if you haven't heard about it, this virus is really, really bad. It is actually super contagious, and then you're gonna start bleeding from your eyes, bleeding from your nose, bleeding from all the holes of your bodies, and then you're gonna bleed out, and you're gonna die of dehydration and pain and everything. So I'm gonna try to adapt myself in order to be immune. So me as an individual, I am not capable of doing it, but actually a whole population over the time will have probably these adaptations that will be able at some point to become immune to specific diseases or something else. But it's going to be through time. It's not going to be right away. So adaptations, as I was mentioning, they develop over the time in the population as small changes in the DNA. So let's see, Lisette is asking, so the offspring will be immune or not? So say once as a population, So say this individual A over here is not going to be immune to a specific disease, but then you're gonna start having adaptations, which at the end, you're gonna have the generation Z over here is going to have enough adaptations in order to become immune to the disease. Then this whole population is going to be immune to the disease. So in the case of adaptations in this, we have to think as whole populations. We don't think as individuals, because I won't be able to have an adaptation right now. Say like I want to create an adaptation for flying. Me as an individual, I won't be able to make it on my own. But then if we work as a whole populations, generation after generation after generation, then we can reach that capability of getting adapted to that. So exactly, and it happens gradually over time. So since we have like really long generations, I think it is like every 25 years we have a new generation coming. So you heard about the millennials, and before that the boomers, and before that something else, and then we have the Gen Z, and now I think the new ones are going to be called the coronials because of the coronavirus or something like that. So it's like we have every 25 years we have a generation. But think as a bacteria can reproduce every 20 minutes. So imagine if we do a new generation every 25 years, but a bacteria can do it in 20 minutes. So the time for them to adapt is going to be much faster. And it's not like they can adapt faster, it's just like they can reproduce much faster than us. So their generations run really, really fast. Or even other smaller animals, they have lifespans of 2, 3 years. So the first year they're already reproducing. So they might have rates of evolution or mutations and adaptations 25 times faster. And it is just because they live less than us. So that's, it has to be relative to the lifespan of the organism, right?
Professor.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, say we have, somebody has measles, right? Like 2,000 years ago, the measles came about. What you're saying is after generation, we would get an immunity to it? Or would it be more that the immune, there was a antidote to make the immunity, and we adapted to the antidote, which then mutated to where the measles didn't come about anymore?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So on one case, we have to think, and there is something called the Red Queen hypothesis, which is taken from Alice in Wonderland. And there is a section in which Alice, I think the Red Queen tells Alice that she has to keep running in order to stay in the same place. So I think you're trying to get immune to measles, right? And then you're trying to, and then as a population, you are getting adapted, that your immune system is going to work better for that. But on the other side, you have to think as the disease, you are also going to be evolving because you still want to get infecting the other organism. So it's going to be a constant race between one species and the other and the other and the other in order to see which one is the one that is going to survive or not. So this is going to be, it's more like in this case of say like viruses and parasites and everything, there's going to be a constant race. It's like the Cold War, like who has the biggest atomic bomb? I have one, I'm gonna make a bigger one. No, I'm gonna make a bigger one. So you constantly are doing it. So we as humans, we got to the point that we have vaccines, so we can now outcompete organisms like those, like viruses, because then we just don't give them time to adapt to anything. So even if they can reproduce faster, but our vaccines are going to be given a fast way, an efficient way, like what's happening right now, say with COVID-19, that actually the virus is not going to, or the parasite is not going to have time to adapt to the new changes. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna just kill that one. And that happens in many species that are going, they're extinct. I mean, extinct They didn't survive because they just didn't have the time to adapt to that specific environment. Mhm. So did I solve your answer? Did I solve your questions over there?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so let's just keep talking a little bit about this, and then adaptations in humans. Which ones just as a just just to think what adaptations do you think we might have as humans in order to survive? Like which adaptations we have you think we have other organisms usually don't have? Which adaptations you think we might have as humans? Anyone has any idea what adaptations? I mean, we are species Homo sapiens. We have existed for a couple 100,000 years. And just let me connect my computer because the battery is about to die. Right. So which adaptations do you think we have as humans? So one of our adaptations is in our hands. Which adaptations do you think we might have as humans?
The thumb?
Yeah. So the thumb that can the opposite thumb they call it, right? So
Opposing?
opposing thumb, yeah, thank you. So you see, like if you check the chimpanzees and gorillas and other organisms that they have similar like structures like ours, like they cannot do this process of opposing the thumb to the other fingers. So this is an adaptation because we as humans are using tools for everything. So hammers, and we using, I mean, early humans, spears, arrows, and everything. And we can oppose the thumbs through this, Amazon law here. Give me 1 second. Hey, here. Delivery, my dog doesn't like that. Anyways, sorry about it. So the thumb is one of the things. Hey, down. Okay, so the thumb is one of the adaptations because we're using tools, so we need to do that. So try to tie your shoes without your thumb and see how difficult this is going to be. Or try to, on a daily basis, you do something that you normally do, or even writing without your thumb, and you see how difficult this, any task that you do on a daily basis, just writing right now, try to write without your thumb, try to use a pen or a pencil and write your whole name without your thumb, and you're gonna see like it's so complicated to do it. Tie your shoes or grab a spoon or a knife or something like that is going to be very complicated. Another adaptation is the size of our brain. You see the cortex, the frontal cortex, which is the one for thinking, has been enlarged, and our brain is relatively bigger than other species similar to humans, like apes, like gorillas, bonobos, and chimpanzees. Or ratio like body to brain is going to be, the brain is going to be bigger because that's going to be an adaptation, because one of the things that we do is like we create tools and we create verbal communication and everything for everything that we do. Like all humans, we have those same characteristics, and those are adaptations that we use on a daily basis. So try to tie your shoes or something without your thumb, and you can let me know if that was a good adaptation or not, all right? So then in the same years, like I'm gonna talk for like 5, 10 more minutes, and then we're gonna go on a break all the way to 7:20. So there was another guy called Alfred Russel Wallace. So Wallace actually is one of my favorite characters in history of evolution, because they don't give him enough credit of what he discovered. But back in those times, he was actually exchanging letters and information with Charles Darwin about natural selection. But actually, Russel Wallace, he conceived independently the idea of evolution through natural selection. but he was checking everything, and that's what I am trying to answer over here, this question over here. He was seeing everything from a very different perspective. So Darwin was checking a few islands, like a couple miles away from each other, but actually Russell Wallace, he was actually checking these differences in matter of hundreds of miles away from each other. So he was comparing like in a geographical range that was like 10, 20, 50 times bigger than the ones that Darwin was using. And he established something called the biogeography, which is the explanation on how and why we have similar organisms in different locations. Say, for example, like when you check the fossil records, and then you have fossils of, say, T-Rex in Africa, and then you have fossils of T-Rex in South America. And then you are like, but you have the Atlantic in the middle, so you cannot think like a T-Rex could be swimming. Well, first of all, these like arms are really short, so how come they were swimming? They couldn't be swimming, and the Atlantic is like what, like 2,000 miles wide between Africa and South America. So how come they were, you find fossil records over there? So it turns out that actually Africa and South America about like 100 million years ago, they were connected. They were once the same continent. But then we have this tectonic plate theory, which establishes like the surface of Earth is moving around, floating in magma, which is like hot lava over there. So across the time, like everything was moving around, and that's why Africa and South America got separated. But then the fossils of organisms, they stay in the same place. And that's why, for example, also we have marsupials only in Australia and similar islands over there, because at some point they got isolated from there, and only just a few marsupials like possums and other similar organisms where they remain in the big continents like America. But then the big ones like the kangaroo, koalas, and everything, they got isolated over there. So Russell Wallace was trying to explain natural selection by checking the big sizes, like big geographical sizes over here. So this is the picture of Wallace. So he looked really cool. Like, that's a shame we couldn't have like a field trip with him and explaining everything. That would have been really nice. So, and then when the book was published, the book of Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species, was published, then there was like a big debate between Huxley and Wilberforce. So there was like this, Wilberforce was a bishop, and then Henry Huxley was like a real defendant of Charles Darwin's idea. So they had like a debate, exchanging letters to the Royal Academy of Sciences in London, and they were trying to explain like if it was for creationism or it was for just evolution. And then at the end, within the same circle of scientists, everyone gave the reason to Huxley. But either way, like in the matter of normal people, people were still believing that if evolution existed, then it was just part of the God will of how everything was created. So at the end, just to go before to break, Charles Darwin published a second book a couple years later, which is called The Descendants of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. So he was actually establishing right over there, as David was mentioning before, that like we are coming from an ancestor with another apes, like, or hominids, like bonobos, gorillas, chimpanzees, and everything. And Darwin was saying that we as humans are actually animals. He presented his idea of something called sexual selection. So people started making fun of Charles Darwin like this, like, oh yeah, like you're coming from monkeys. So they were like just bringing down the idea of Charles Darwin that we are actually sharing a common ancestor with other apes. So in the case of natural selection, is a mode of natural selection in which members of one biological sex, that is female or males, are going to choose mates of the other sex to mate with and leave offspring. So that is, say, in the case of birds, for example, the females are going to be the ones that actually are going to pick the males. And then once they're picked, then they're going to mate, and then they're going to leave an offspring, and this offspring is going to do the same. The females are going to be choosing the males to mate, etc., and so on and so on. So this is going to leave a differential rate of reproduction among individuals. Example of this ones, if you see the peacock, and you see why it has the feathers like this one, really intense, and the bright blue chest over here with the crest over here and everything. And then you have another peacock over here that has only half the size, only like tiny ones. And then these both males are going to compete um, these two guys are going to compete to reproduce with a female. So then the female is going to pick which one is going to be the best one to leave an offspring. So the female is going to be like, well, like he has a bigger feathers, he has a brighter blue chest. So that means he is probably healthier and probably has the best genes. So I'm going to pick the individual with the best features because I'm going to ensure that my offspring is going to have higher probabilities of survivorship, and then they're going to be able to reproduce more than the other organisms. So that's a mode of natural selection in that way. The same with the next picture over here with the mandrills over here. So say you have a male that it has a really like kind of like bluish color, something like that, a little bit of red over here. We have this big one that actually has like a really bright red nose and everything. So the females are going to be like, well, you know, like this one has like a brighter nose, like a red nose and everything. So that means that he's healthier, he's bigger, and then he has best genes. So I'm gonna mate with this individual because it's going to have better genes for my offspring. So I'm going to mate with him, but not with this guy. So probably this guy is never going to mate. And then the genes from this organism are not going to pass to the next generation, but from this one is going to pass it to the next generation. So then this is a type of sexual selection Darwin was mentioning. So if you actually check Netflix, there is something called Birds from Paradise. You're gonna check like all the males of those islands. Actually, they have super bright colorations. The songs are going to be super weird. The mating process and calling the females is going to be extreme and exotic and everything. So the best ones are going to leave the genes to the next generation because the females are going to pick the best ones over there. So you know everything is going to be on the genes. That's a shame that Darwin and Gregor Mendel they didn't meet each other back in time because he could have explained how the factors or the characteristics were transferring from one generation to the next one. And don't forget, when we're talking about dominants and recessives and everything, they could make completely sense. It wasn't until early 20th century that Julian Huxley, he actually fused both theories of evolution with Darwin and Mendelian genetics, and then we created the modern synthesis of evolution, which brought everything, all the evolutionary theory that we know up to date. So let's take a break right now if you want over here. So then we're gonna move on with the methods, mechanisms of evolution. So let's take a 10-minute break. So we're gonna come back at 7:33. And this is kind of like a long lecture. So let's see about like 8:15, how far we are in the lecture. And then let's take a break for 10 minutes, okay? Thank you. If anyone has any questions, you can just ask me. I'll be around over here. Okay, everyone, so we are about to start in a few seconds. So if you can just let me know that you are around by thumbs up, or yeah, David is saying hi, James is saying the same. If you can turn on your cameras a little bit. If not, you haven't brushed your hair all day. I just haven't. No, I'm just kidding. Brush my hair in the morning. That's it. And Israel is here. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Nolan. All right. So I see Jocelyn also here. Okay. Thank you, Diana. All right. So let's continue with the lecture over here. And let's see more chat. Yeah, Israel is also chatting. Thank you so much. Okay. So let's continue with the lecture. Is there any um, question that anyone might have? Or everything has been pretty straightforward? No questions or anything? So, like everything that we are discussing right now has been the process of discussion and denying and accepting and fighting and pushing and struggling and discovering for over 150 years. Charles Darwin, other people, and trying to discover the mechanisms of evolution, how this works and everything. Huxley in the early 20th century, synthesizing, putting together, fusing Mendelian genetics with the theory of Charles Darwin. So we finally understand how we pass this information from generation to generation. And you'll see later, I have a slide over here, actually with a Punnett square from Mendel, mixed with the frequencies of alleles and how this works in evolution. So you're gonna see that actually everything fits perfectly over there, and that's another reason of why we say that evolution is a fact, because everything is fitting perfectly like a puzzles when you're working and you finish it. So, if you didn't hear of this before, there wasn't a lot of, and there's still a lot of opposition of for evolution up to now, up to date. And there was even in 1925 in Tennessee, in the United States, there was um, a trial that they call the Scopes Monkey Trial, because there was this teacher in the high school that he was trying to explain and teach evolution in science classes. So many people didn't like that, because then the children started talking about evolution, that we were coming from the monkeys, and people were like, where did you get that information? So they didn't like that information was given in classes in high school. So then they sued that professor, that teacher, and then there was this big trial called the Scopes Monkey Trial, in which actually the judge leaned towards opposing teaching evolution in high school classes. So the professor, the teacher, I think had to pay like, I don't know if it was like $25 or $250, something like that. But he had to pay a fine that it was just like really not a lot of money, even for back in those years. But it just demonstrated that still there was a position by the general community against evolution. So these oppositions still exist up to now, and you have many beliefs and many ideas that people still don't want to believe in evolution. So there is a discussion that has been opened already in Canvas, which is going to be the homework for this week. And we're going to discuss the following over there. And if you want to give your thoughts right now, you're welcome to give it. But also, I want you to discuss with other students in Canvas about these following questions. Should creationism, like there was an entity, a superior entity that created us. So should creationism and evolution be given equal time in science lessons? So this is going to be the discussion that we need to write down in Canvas. So say if you think that creationism is should be given equal time because it's worth the value to explain another ideas in science lessons, then you have to go to Canvas, open the discussions, or write down, I believe that creationism, blah, 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 because of this and this and this and this and this. And then if you think that is not the case, and evolution needs to be taught in science lessons because evolution directly relates to science, but creationism, it doesn't relate to science or something like that. So then you can be like, I don't believe that creationism should be given equal time in science because this and this and this and these ideas. So no, for some many people, sometimes I found like this is like sensitive questions or anything like that. But we are already adults, so we sometimes we need to be discussing about these topics in order to learn, grow as person, as an individual, um, and as individuals, we need to discuss this. So don't forget, we have to follow the rules of etiquette. So you have to be cordial. You don't have to be insulting anyone else because of the ideas that they have. If somebody is just replying back to you in disagreement, like try keep your a conversation logical and cordial. So I'll be reviewing all this information, and if you see me like giving my input in some conversations and stuff like that, well, I'll be around. The rubrics of this is going to be 5 points for the total homework for the discussion. 2.5 are going to be by your answer, and another 2.5 are going to be if you answer to two other students. But at this point, and I was accepting before the other discussions in which you were saying, I totally agree with you. I like your idea, nicely done. So those answers are not going to be taken into consideration because I want you to have a more thoughtful reply, because then I can just reply to everyone, nicely done, I agree with you, and then I'm gonna get a full grade. But I want you this time to be answering properly to something like, I agree to the point in which you are mentioning that science is this and this and this, and so I agree with you with something. Like try to explain a little bit more logical instead of like you saying I like your idea or something like that. So I'll be reading all of those topics over there. So don't forget, everything is on the genes. The genotype is everything. The DNA is the central part of everything. It's going to tell us what to do, when to do it, how to do it. So the organism genotype and the environment is going to determine the phenotype of the organism at that specific moment. So everything is all in the genes. So a little bit of the DNA. So probably I'm going to skip this one because we discussed about the DNA. Like back in time in the in the early 20th centuries, when Julian Huxley was fusing Mendelian genetics with evolution, they were like, okay, yeah, but like what else? How can we explain what molecule is the one that is passing from generation to generation? Our proteins, our nucleic acids or lipids? What is it? How does it work? So it wasn't until 1953 when Watson and Crick, they had already put together all the structure of the DNA, and we understand the functions and how it replicates and then how it processes everything from transcription to translation, and how we pass it to proteins, and how these proteins are part of the phenotype. Until back then we understood more and more and more, and then we started giving more like explanations to how evolution works. So now in this moment, we're going to discuss about the mechanisms of evolution and how evolution happens. Because, as a fact, evolution is a fact, so we have to explain how this happens. So the first mechanism is going to be mutations. So, like as I was mentioning at the beginning of the class, when Charles Xavier, the X-Men, and the X-Men first movie was like saying, mutations, the key of evolution. Actually, he was right over there. Mutations are going to be just changes, random changes on the sequence of DNA of an organism. So mutations can be just like copying errors. So when you are like replicating DNA, so in the synthesis phase on the life cycle of the interface, on the life cycle of the cell, so there might be a mistake that probably the DNA polymerase is going to copy everything, but then except like instead of putting a thymine over there, is going to add an adenine. So this tiny error, when it reads back, is not going to recognize that as a mistake. Then you will have a mutation over there, which is going to be a change, a random change of the sequence of the DNA. So these mutations can be caused by radiation, by viruses, by chemicals, carcinogens, and even if you hear when the explosion in 1986 with Chernobyl, there was like a huge, like, there was a lot of radiation around, and this radiation by uranium was providing a lot of energy, and this energy, gamma rays and other types of type of radiations were able to modify and disrupt your DNA, even if you didn't feel it, like you didn't feel the radiation going through your bodies, but actually this one was going through your body, destroying cells, destroying the DNA, etc., etc. So they was causing mutations in the bodies of the people that was living over there. So mutations usually are going to be very, very, very rare, and in many cases are going to be like damaging effects that are going to have damaging effects to organisms. So there are going to be mutations in which organisms are going to born, but then they're going to pass away because they didn't have the right enzymes, or they didn't have the right phenotype in order to survive. But as it says over here, organisms are going to have special enzymes in which the job is going to repair the faulty DNA. So the DNA polymerase, the one that is adding the nucleotides to the new strand of DNA, is going to be the same one that is going back and forth, checking for these mistakes, because we don't have to have any, but actually we are going to have. And it is thought that we as individuals, we are going to have an average about 47 different like copying errors or changes in our DNA that actually no one else is going to have. So these mutations between organisms is something called the single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNPs. And these SNPs are just going to be sometimes there in your DNA, but the function is not going to change for anything. So we might have these changes. Each one of us is going to have different 47 different changes, but this is not going to affect our performance at all. But also imagine we have billions of nucleotides. So divide 47 by billions of nucleotides. So it's just like a small percentage of your DNA is going to be different. Probably 0.0000001% of your DNA is going to be different than the rest of humans. So we have different types of mutations. For example, we have deletion, in which a section of the DNA or the genes are going, of the chromosome are actually are going to be deleted. Duplication, in which this section of the chromosome is going to be duplicated. So you have a larger chromosome, you have going to have two copies in the same chromosome. Inversion, in which genes are going to switch from position. So instead of being like, say, north and south, it's going to be south to north. And then insertion, in which we have like tiny other chromosomes are going to insert completely on another chromosome. So you have a different um, chromosome over here, because then they're gonna be fused over here. So these mutations are going to happen all the time in all living organisms. So do you think mutations are going to be good or bad? So what are your thoughts regarding this? Anyone has anything to say? Do you think there can be good or can be bad?
I think it could be both. I mean, depending on the situation, you could have a good mutation where it's getting rid of say, diseases that might be within the body. So like a radiation taking away, like when you go through chemotherapy and it's taking out the cancers or the DNA for cancer. So that would be a good thing. But then you gave an example about Chernobyl, which deleted some DNAs, which would cause a bad thing. So I think it would be both.
Yeah, exactly. So I totally agree with you. And I think James was also saying it could be both of them. So, as you were saying, mutations can be bad for organisms because it can be lethal. So any changes, it can be really bad for the organism to the point that they can die. Neutral, like these ones that I was mentioning, the single nucleotide polymorphism, in which you don't know, you have a change over there, the enzyme is going to be, or the protein or the phenotype is going to be expressed normal, there is nothing, or beneficial to an organism in the case of, say, the white rabbit, that this mutation is going to make the rabbits look white. So then, like in snow, they're gonna camouflage, and then this mutation is going to be beneficial to that specific environment because it's gonna help them to survive. So it can be bad or nothing or beneficial. So mutations can be either one of those ones. So the beneficial ones, as the example that I was mentioning with the white rabbit, are going to be the ones that could provide an advantage, a reproductive and survivorship advantage to the organism. So this white fur, white hair, like adaptation for this rabbit is going to be an advantage because it's going to survive more and therefore is going to reproduce more. So mutations at the end, and I'm pretty sure that's something I'm going to ask in the exam, are going to be the ultimate source of variation upon which natural selection is going to act. So natural selection is going to try like hundreds of options, like option A, option B, option C. Didn't work, this one didn't work, the other one didn't work here, didn't work there. Oh, but the white coloration, actually that one worked. So I'm going to start changing my allele frequencies over there, my percentages, my probabilities with the white rabbits, because the white rabbits are going to have this mutation that is giving the white coloration, and then I'm going to survive more in the snow. So these mutations are going to be the source of variation in which natural selection is going to act. So that makes sense to you? Yes, not? Yes. So don't forget that mutations are the ultimate. When I ask you what is the ultimate source of variation upon which natural selection acts, you can tell me mutations, because mutations they're gonna be random. There is going to be mutations in the whole population, are going to be probably thousands of mutations. Some of them we won't even notice that they exist. Some of them are not even going to exist because it's going to be lethal. So the embryo or the fetus or the child or the children or the early organism is never going to develop, or they can be beneficial, and these mutations are going to be passed to the next generation, and then passed to the next generations. Then they're going to become more often and more frequent and more frequent and more frequent. So mutations, don't forget, are the very ultimate source of variation for evolution. So if we don't have mutations, then we won't change the DNA, and then everything gets static, and then we won't have evolution. Then we won't have any changes in DNA, and everything will remain as is right over there. So as I was saying before, evolution never acts upon out of the nothing features. So say like Wolverine with the claws, like, and I have my claws over here, like what, but where these claws are coming from? So I must have a phenotype and a genotype before in order to work on that specific phenotype or physical characteristics in order to change it. As I was saying, like if you see all the vertebrates with wings, like pterodactyls that are extinct, and you check birds and you check bats, actually you will see that actually they don't have like a four limbs like arms, and then they have another pair of wings in the back. No, actually, their wings are going to be like what for us is our arms over here. So say if at some point, say for any X or Y reason, we have this selective pressure to fly as humans, then what's going to happen in probably hundreds of thousands of years, then it's like our hands are going, our arms are going to get modified for flight. So we are not going to have like an extra wings in the back, like feathers or something like that. They want to be flying really cool or something like that. And actually, we're going to modify our arms in order to fly, for example. So imagine humans flying, they should have like modified arms in order to fly. So evolution always is going to modify the phenotypes that already exist, okay? So variation, speaking of mutations, variation is just like changes due to the different types of alleles that we have. You think as an ice cream flavor, so an ice cream is going to be always an ice cream, cold, made of cream with anything else or something like that. But then we have chocolate flavor, vanilla flavor, strawberry, rainbow, bubble gum, blah, 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 blah. We have like hundreds of different type of flavors of the same ice cream, right? Or the same thing called ice cream. So the same is the alleles. So we have the gene that is going to be, say, for the flavor of ice cream, but we're gonna have different alleles for one of each different flavor of ice cream that we have. The same with variation over here. So we're gonna have hundreds of types of variation. So see the chicks over here, there's going to be one that actually is going to be brown. So it's going to provide the variation among these four ones over here. Mechanism number 2 is natural selection. We discussed already about what is natural selection. So I'm just gonna say and explain something, an example that that happened in the early 1900s. So there was this city in England that actually had two types of moth over here. So there was this type of moth during the Industrial Revolution, in which there was a lot of smog all over the place. So the trees in which the moth used to rest, they become like soot covers. They started to become like black because all the coal and the smoke was getting attached to the bark of the trees. So these guys over here, since they look black, so they were seen less by birds. So these ones that actually looked whitish, they were easily seen on the trees because the birds were flying and they couldn't see these guys, but they saw easily these ones over here. So the same example of the brown rabbit and the white rabbit, the birds started eating these guys over here. So then the allele frequencies, the genotype for organisms with this phenotype started to decrease. So we started seeing less and less and less of these guys, and we started seeing more and more and more of these ones over here. So what if happened if we would stop this coal production and smoke and everything, and then the trees started getting clean and everything? So then probably these ones were going to be easily seen more than these ones. And then the best adapted feature, which was to be black coloration, is going to be detrimental. So again, that's what I emphasize in the fact that it has to be depending on the specific environment in which we are studying at that specific moment, okay? Mechanism number 3 is going to be called migration or genetic flow. So the third mechanism on how evolution works is going to be by migration. So, you know, many organisms are going to move from one place to another. Even other organisms that don't move, they're going to migrate with pollen far away. If you have like strong winds, they can even fly far away, miles away from where the plant was originally planted. And say if these organisms from population A are going to move to a different population, say population B that has a different genetic pool, say all of these ones are going to be brown, and all of these ones are going to be white. So the one that is brown is going to jump to population B that has actually all white. So this organism, when mates with one of these ones, is going to actually give them the brown alleles to these populations. Then the frequencies of the alleles are going to change. So this is something with immigration, which is like organisms arriving to that place, and immigration when they're leaving that place. And this is the example over here that I have for migration or genetic flow in the case of deers. So say we have population 1, red ones, and then population 2, which are going to be blue ones. And then we have this mountain range in which we have like a tiny stretch, a tiny pass over here. And then you see like two of the golden deers are going to move to the next one just by chances, are going to be like, okay, let's see what's going on over there. So they start walking and walking and walking and walking, and they go through this path. And then actually they're going to go to this, the eastern deer population, the blue ones. And then when they start mating with these ones, they are already going to give different alleles to this blue population. So at the end, the frequencies or the percentages of this population is going to change. Remember, like a Punnett square in which you have like a homozygous dominant with a homozygous recessive, and then you mix them, then you're gonna have already heterozygous all over the place. So this is something similar that is gonna happen over there. Mechanism number 4 is going to be called genetic drift. So genetic drift is just caused by mere chances. Is something that the individuals, is something that the population is not going to able to control. It's just going to happen because random sampling of organisms are going to happen. So it's just due to randomness. So the example of this one is, say we have a pool of population with 3 brown frogs, and then we have the other ones with a darker green, and we have another with a light green. But there was a landslide or a hurricane, tornado, something happened that is really, really, really random, and then all the brown ones died just because they were just sitting over there by chance. It's like winning the lottery, but that was a bad lottery for them, and they just passed away. And then the next generation will contain only green ones. So genetic drift is just going to be just by mere randomness over there. So that's mechanism number 4. Mechanism number 5 is something called genetic hitchhiking. So I think that's the last mechanism that we have for evolution. Yes. And then say, for example, when you have an allele that is going to be under selective pressure. That means that it's going to be selected, say, at the allele. So say you have the chromosome over here, the chromosome, and then you're gonna have here the white fur coloration for the rabbits. And right next to it, you have another allele that has nothing to do, like literally nothing to do, like the blood type, like something completely unrelated. So since this one, the white one is going to be positively selected for the next generation, then this one that has nothing to do immediately is going to be passed to the next generation, just because it's next to the other one. You say you're sitting over there and then somebody is going to give, I don't know, like a lot of money. You do not throw a lot of money to a specific person because you wanna, that person wants to throw away money to that person. But you're sitting next to that person and the other person, you throw a bunch of money over there and you get $1,000 in your lap just because you were sitting next to that person. And you're like, oh, okay, I got $1,000 just because I was sitting over here. So it's just like chance that I was next to the person who was going to win. So then the allele that has nothing to do is going to be passed. So an example of this in organisms is the Y chromosome, the ones that determine male biological sex. It's just because it's just right over there, it's just going to pass to the next generation. So it's not really that it has a pressure on that. So again, the mechanisms of evolution in summary are going to be natural selection, mutations, gene flow or migration, genetic hitchhiking, and genetic drift over here. So we can just check the examples over here. Again, genetic drift, remember, is just random events that happens here and there. So in evolution, we can have something called microevolution. So example of microevolution is when the changes in the frequencies of alleles are going to be very, very, very tiny. So say in the case of dogs, you have the husky, you have the beagle, then you have, I think this is a beagle too. And then you have other types of dogs and everything. So it's just like small changes in phenotype, but at the end, they're going to still belong to the same species, or even in the case of dogs and wolf. So say in the case of wolves, the species is going to be Canis lupus, but then we're gonna have a subspecies, which is gonna be the lupus. So the Canis lupus is going to be the wolf. And in the case of the dog, is going to be the Canis lupus familiaris. So the differences has happened between dogs and wolves, like their wolves, maybe like in 60 to 100,000 years. So genetically, there are not big differences between these organisms, between wolves and dogs, to be called them different species. In the case of macroevolution, then you have complete sexual isolation between organisms, and then the physical characteristics are going to be more obvious. They're going to be more conspicuous. So the case of the Galapagos finches, the changes are going to be more obvious, and then these species are going to become completely isolated in geography. And then if you try to mate them together, they are going to be unable to mate with each other. So that's something in microevolution. Something called convergent evolution is when independent evolution of similar features in species from different lineages.
You don't like listening to them.
So say, for example, in the case of convergent evolution, we are going to create structures that we are going to call analogous structures, like this one over here. So let me show you an example of convergent evolution so we can understand it better. So you have the pterodactyl over here, you have the bat over here, and you have the bird over here, that actually they don't share a recent common ancestor. Probably their common ancestor is not date back 150 million years ago or something like that. So their common ancestor is really, really, really back in time. But as you can see, they have been adapted for flying. So they're going to contain similar structures for flying, which are going to be the wings. So anatomically, they're going to be something called the analogous structures. Analogous are coming from structures that are going to have the same function, but are coming from different common ancestors. The same with the example of the fins of a penguin, the fins of a dolphin, and probably we draw a fish over here. All of them are going to have fins, but they are going to come from different common ancestors. Probably their common ancestor is going to be back in time, like really long time ago. So we're going to have convergent evolution. Convergent means like you are meeting in the same spot. In the case of divergent evolution, divergent means like they are separating. So in the case of divergent evolution, we are going to have the same common ancestor, but then we're going to have from this common ancestor a branching in which we're going to have species A, species B, and species C, and species D. They're going to separate from the common ancestor. Example of this one can be, for example, when we are studying the anatomical features of, say, for example, a man, a cow, a horse, and a whale, and a bird. If you have this color-coded example over here of the bones, you are going to notice that many of these structures, like the limbs of every single organism, we're gonna have like similar position in the arm for the different bones that we have. So that means that once we share a common ancestor, but this common ancestor probably it was existed long time ago. So from this common ancestor, we started to diverge, and then these structures are different. They're called homologous structures. Remember, analogous is like they're coming from, they have same function, and they're coming from different common ancestors. In the case of homologous structures, they have different functions, but they're coming from a most recent common ancestor. So this is what you can see over here. The color coded is better. So you can see like the green one is the very first one attached to the shoulder, and then followed by two bones. I'm actually really bad at knowing these bones names, but then you can see that they have the same position in the arm of every single of these organisms over here. So this is divergent evolution. It's the same with if you watch Pokemon or something like that, you have this one, and then it can be depending on the pressure of the environmental pressure, they can be either one of these ones over here. Same with divergent evolution for one early primate that we had. Then we had different types of primates like lemurs, lorises, New World monkeys with tail, Old World monkeys with tails, and then humans and other modern apes over here. So divergent means like you start getting away from each other. So association today still occurs. I was mentioning over here. I'm not gonna read the whole slide over here, but as I was telling you before, we can run examples of evolution in the laboratory settings with bacteria. Even this example with the mosquitoes in the early 1900s in London. So then when they check the genetic differences with them, they're gonna notice that the mosquitoes that are over here in these tunnels in the trains are going to be genetically different than the ones that are found outside of the streets. So even you see something that is a really low scale, a really small scale, actually we have evolution happening over there. There is something called the Hardy-Weinberg evolution, which establishes, it is something that is being established when you don't have evolution. So usually, remember when we were working with the laboratories before, and I was telling you the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis was when we didn't have statistical differences between experiment A and experiment B, or the variables are not going to change anything. So the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is going to help us in order to demonstrate that actually there are differences in the frequencies of the genes or the alleles, and thus we can compare this equilibrium with real data, and then we can then demonstrate that actually we have evolution happening. So then you're gonna tell me how the hell did you get the p squared plus 2p cubed plus q squared equals 1, or say 100%, right? So this is given in frequencies. So Hardy and Weinberg, so there were like two scientists that they were trying to understand the processes of evolution. And they came up with this idea from the Punnett square, in which they were saying, if we have the frequencies of homozygous dominance, then we have the frequencies of all heterozygous, and then we have all the frequencies of all homozygous recessive, you know, Mendelian genetics like we saw last week. Then if we combine them together, we're going to get 100% of all the genotypes that exist in a population. So this equation came from a very simple Punnett square, in which they were just putting like, okay, so we have the male gametes, they can be either dominant or recessive. So they call the dominant P and the recessive Q. And then we have the female gametes, they can be either dominant or P or recessive or Q. So they were like, let's just make a simple Punnett square with this one, and let's use Mendelian genetics. So they call this AA P squared, so it should be like PP, you know, PP over here. And then we have these heterozygous PQ and PQ, and then we have these homozygous recessive QQ or Q squared. So they're okay, so if this one is 100% of all the genotypes that we will find in evolution, then it's going to be, how many P squares do we have? It's only one, so P squared, and then we have two heterozygous, is going to be 2PQ, and then we're gonna have one homozygous recessive, which is going to be Q squared. So then if we have P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared is going to be 100%. So that's how they came up with this equation over here from a single Punnett square that explains the perfect equilibrium when we don't have any force of evolution. So based on this, then when you're working on any example of evolution, then you can explain if there is any changes in these frequencies of homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive, then you're gonna prove that actually there is a change over there. So there might be a force of evolution acting upon that specific population, right? So let me ask you, it's already 8:13. So let me stop over here and I want your attention right now. So do you want me to finish this, which might take all the way until the end at 8:45? Or do you want me to hold this for Wednesday? Wednesday might last then hour and a half, like half an hour of the final part of the lecture, and then the discussion for the special project. So which of those ones would you prefer to do? You wanna finish right now, or do you wanna finish on Wednesday? Is anyone over here still awake besides David?
Wednesday.
Wednesday, tired already? Wednesday, we have 3 Wednesdays.
Yeah, I prefer Wednesday.
Yeah, right. I know it's like, David is saying finish now. We have 3 Wednesdays. We have 1